The 1960s were a golden age when American automotive engineering reached speeds most people thought impossible. On racetracks from Daytona to Riverside, these machines rewrote the record books and proved that raw horsepower and brilliant engineering could turn rubber into legend. Today, we're counting down the 12 fastest 1960s cars on the racetrack. The machines that dominated circuits, shattered lap records, and showed the world what American speed really meant. Buckle up, because this is where nostalgia meets velocity. Number 12, the 1965 Pontiac GTO. The car that started the muscle car revolution wasn't just a street brawler. When the 1965 Pontiac GTO hit racetracks across America, it proved that affordable performance could translate into genuine racing speed. Pontiac took their mid-sized Tempesta platform and stuffed in a 389 cubic inch V8 that produced 360 horsepower in tri-power configuration. This wasn't supposed to be a track car by design, but racers saw potential where corporate bean counters saw liability. On road courses like Bridgehampton and Marlboro, privateer GTO entries shocked the establishment by running lap times that embarrassed purpose-built sports cars costing twice as much. The secret was in the chassis tuning. Pontiac's engineers knew they had a front-heavy beast on their hands, so they stiffened the rear suspension and added heavy-duty components that could handle sustained high-speed cornering. The result was a car that could carry speed through sweeping turns and blast down straights with authority that few competitors could match. The GTO's racing success came from its streetcar roots. Unlike delicate European machinery that required constant attention, the Pontiac could take punishment lap after lap without breaking a sweat. Independent front suspension and a solid rear axle with trailing arms gave it predictable handling that amateur racers could master quickly. On tracks like Lime Rock Park, GTOs regularly posted lap times in the low 1-minute, 40-second range, which put them squarely in competition with Corvettes and imported sports cars that cost thousands more. The sound alone was worth the price of admission. That tri-power setup, 3 two-barrel carburetors feeding hungry cylinders, created a mechanical symphony that echoed off grandstands and sent shivers down spines. When the center carburetor opened up under full throttle, the GTO transformed from civilized cruiser into howling predator. Exhaust notes bounced off pit walls and announced to everyone watching that American muscle had arrived on the racing scene with authority and attitude. What made the GTO special on track wasn't just its speed, but its accessibility. Regular guys could buy one off the showroom floor, bolt on some racing rubber, and compete against thoroughbreds on Sunday afternoon. This democratization of speed changed American motorsports forever. The GTO proved that you didn't need a trust fund or factory backing to go racing. Just courage, skill, and 400 pounds-feet of torque, pushing you toward the next apex. Number 11, the 1967 Mercury Cougar. Most people remember the Mercury Cougar as the sophisticated alternative to the Mustang, but on racetracks across America, the 1967 Cougar was a genuine threat that combined European styling with American brute force. Mercury entered Trans Am racing with serious intentions, and the Cougar proved that luxury and performance weren't mutually exclusive concepts. Under that long hood sat options ranging from the 289 cubic inch small block all the way up to the legendary 427 cubic inch big block that turned this cat into a tiger. Dan Gurney and Parnelli Jones piloted factory-backed Cougars in Trans Am competition, and their results opened eyes throughout the racing world. The Cougar's longer wheelbase, compared to the Mustang, actually helped on fast tracks, providing stability that shorter cars couldn't match at triple-digit speeds. Mercury engineers lowered the suspension, fitted heavy-duty brakes, and installed oil coolers that kept temperatures manageable during 30-lap sprints. The result was a machine that could run consistent lap times, while other cars faded as heat took its toll. On tracks like Riverside International Raceway, the Cougar's combination of power and stability made it devastating on high-speed sections. The big block versions could hit speeds approaching 140 miles per hour on long straights, then dive into corners with confidence that belied their size. Four-wheel disc brakes, rare for American cars of the era, gave drivers the stopping power needed to brake deep into corners and maintain momentum through technical sections. The hidden advantage was weight distribution. Mercury's engineers positioned the engine further back in the chassis compared to the Mustang, improving balance and reducing understeer that plagued many front-heavy muscle cars. This subtle difference translated into tenths of seconds per lap. And in racing, tenths add up to victories. Race-prepped Cougars could lap Laguna Seca in under 2 minutes flat, which put them right alongside purpose-built racing machines from Europe. What enthusiasts loved most was the Cougar's character. This wasn't a stripped-down racer pretending to be a street car. Mercury maintained luxury touches even on competition versions, proof that American ingenuity could blend comfort with speed. When a Cougar screamed past the grandstands at full song, crowds heard refinement in that exhaust note. It was violence delivered with class, aggression wrapped in elegance, and speed that came with style. Number 10. The 1968 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. When Chevrolet designed the Z28 package for the 1968 Camaro, they had one goal in mind: destroy Ford's Mustang in Trans Am racing. This wasn't a street car that happened to race well. This was a homologation special built specifically to dominate road courses, with every component chosen for maximum performance. The 302 cubic inch small block V8 produced an advertised 390 horsepower, but everyone in the paddock knew that number was conservative. Dyno tests suggested output closer to 400 horses screaming through headers into chambered exhaust. Roger Penske's Sunoco Camaro team turned the Z28 into a Trans Am legend. Mark Donohue wheeled these bright blue missiles to multiple victories, proving that Chevrolet's engineering was every bit as good as Ford's best efforts. The secret weapon was the solid lifter camshaft that kept valves dancing at 7,000 RPM without complaint. Combined with 4-bolt main bearing caps and forged internals, this engine could sustain punishment that grenaded lesser motors within laps. On technical tracks like Mid-Ohio and Road America, the Z28's chassis dynamics separated it from pretenders. Heavy-duty front and rear suspension with revised geometry turned the Camaro into a corner carving machine that could change direction with authority. Fat Goodyear racing slicks gave grip that let drivers explore the limits of physics, while quick ratio steering provided feedback that built confidence lap after lap. The best Z28 pilots could carry impossible speeds through ESCs and chicanes, then explode onto straights with violent acceleration. Lap times told the story better than words. At Sebring's demanding 12-hour circuit, race-prepped Z28s posted times in the low 2-minute 30-second range, which was breathtaking for a car you could theoretically buy from a Chevrolet dealer. The combination of a low cowl hood for improved forward visibility, functional brake ducts for cooling, and a rear spoiler that added genuine downforce made the Z28 look as fast standing still as it did at speed. What made this Camaro special wasn't just speed, but versatility. The same car that dominated road courses on Sunday could be driven to work on Monday. This dual-purpose nature embodied everything great about American muscle cars of the 1960s. Engineers created machines that refused to compromise, that delivered genuine racing performance without sacrificing everyday usability. The Z28 proved you could have it all if you were brave enough to build it right. Number 9. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. When Dodge decided to conquer NASCAR's high-speed superspeedways, they created something that looked like it came from another planet. The 1969 Charger Daytona featured a massive nose cone that stretched nearly 2 feet beyond the standard grille and a towering rear wing that sat on supports high enough to walk under without ducking. This wasn't styling for its own sake. This was pure aerodynamics translated into steel and fiberglass. And on tracks like Daytona and Talladega, this wild design made the Charger Daytona the fastest stock car America had ever seen. Buddy Baker drove a Charger Daytona to speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour during testing at Talladega, becoming the first driver to crack that barrier in a stock car. That pointed nose sliced through air with efficiency that standard muscle cars couldn't approach, while the rear wing generated downforce that kept the back tires planted even as speeds climbed toward insanity. Dodge engineers understood that At velocities above 180 miles per hour, aerodynamics mattered more than raw horsepower. They were right. The heart of the Daytona was the legendary 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, producing 425 horsepower in street trim. Race versions pushed that number well past 500 horses, breathing through massive carburetors and exhaling through headers that turned exhaust into thunder. On NASCAR superspeedways, Daytonas circled the high banks at average speeds approaching 190 miles per hour, leaving conventional muscle cars looking like they were standing still. What spectators loved most was watching these winged warriors draft past each other on long straightaways. The nose cone and rear wing worked together to create a low-pressure zone that sucked following cars forward, allowing pack racing at speeds that terrified drivers and thrilled fans. When 3 or 4 Daytonas came through turns 1 and 2 side by side at Daytona, with engines screaming at 6,000 RPM and sheet metal inches apart, it was automotive ballet performed at death-defying velocity. The Daytona proved that American engineers could think beyond brute force. They understood fluid dynamics, computational design, and wind tunnel testing. They created a race car that looked impossible, but worked brilliantly. Only 503 Charger Daytonas were built to satisfy NASCAR homologation rules, and every single one became instant legend. This was the machine that showed the world American ingenuity could conquer speed at its highest levels. Number 8, the 1967 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. Long before the Mustang made Ford famous in racing, the Thunderbolt showed what happens when Blue Oval engineers stop playing nice and start building monsters. The 1967 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt was a barely legal drag racing special that dominated NHRA tracks. But in road racing trim, this lightweight warrior proved it could carve corners as well as it could blitz quarter miles. Ford installed a high-revving 427 cubic inch side-oiler V8 that produced upwards of 425 horsepower and enough torque to twist the chassis if you weren't careful. What made the Thunderbolt dangerous on road courses was its stripped-down nature. Ford deleted everything that didn't make the car faster. Sound-deadening heater radio, back seats, gone. Fiberglass panels replaced steel wherever rules allowed. The result was a car that weighed hundreds of pounds less than standard Fairlanes and accelerated like physics was negotiable. On tracks like Lime Rock and Watkins Glen, Thunderbolts could outrun Corvettes through technical sections simply because they had less mass to manage. The side oiler, 427, was a racing masterpiece. Ford engineers routed the oil pump pickup to the side of the pan instead of the bottom, ensuring consistent lubrication during hard cornering when oil sloshed away from the pickup. This seemingly small detail meant the engine could survive sustained high-G turns without oil starvation grenading the bearings. Race drivers pushed Thunderbolts through carousel corners and sweeping bends with confidence that the engine would keep screaming. Lap times were impressive by any measure. At mid-sized tracks, Thunderbolts regularly posted times competitive with purpose-built sports racers, which shocked European teams who couldn't believe a car based on a family sedan could corner with such authority. The secret was in the suspension work. Heavy-duty components, revised spring rates, and careful shock tuning transformed the Fairlane platform into something far beyond its humble origins. What made the Thunderbolt special was its honesty. This wasn't a car pretending to be something else. It was pure racing machine wearing the thinnest possible veneer of street legality. When you heard that side oiler howl past at 8,000 RPM, you weren't listening to a muscle car. You were hearing American racing in its purest form, brutal, effective, and utterly uncompromising. Number 7, the 1968 Plymouth Roadrunner Hemi. Plymouth's budget muscle car philosophy shouldn't have worked on racetracks. The Roadrunner was designed to be affordable performance for the working man, stripped of luxury to keep prices low. But when Plymouth stuffed the legendary 426 cubic inch Hemi V8 under that cartoon-bedecked hood, they created an accidental racing legend. The Hemi Roadrunner became a privateer's dream, a car cheap enough to buy and fast enough to embarrass machinery, costing twice as much. The Hemi engine was American engineering at its finest. Those hemispherical combustion chambers flowed air like nothing else in Detroit, allowing the engine to breathe deeply and rev freely. With dual 4-barrel carburetors feeding hungry cylinders, The Hemi produced a factory-rated 425 horsepower, though everyone knew real output was closer to 500. On racetracks, that power translated into acceleration that pinned drivers into seats and made straightaways disappear in seconds. What shocked racing competitors was how well the basic Roadrunner chassis handled when properly prepared. Plymouth's suspension engineers had created a surprisingly balanced platform that responded well to racing modifications. Stiffen the springs, add bigger sway bars, bolt on racing shocks, and suddenly you had a car that could dance through corners with unexpected grace. At tracks like Briar Motorsport Park and Nelson Ledges, Hemi Roadrunners ran lap times that embarrassed Corvettes and imported sports cars. The sound was unforgettable. The Hemi's unique firing order and aggressive cam profile created an exhaust note that didn't just make noise, it made music. When a Roadrunner came down the front straight with both carburetors wide open, the mechanical symphony echoed off grandstands and vibrated in your chest. It was the sound of controlled violence, of barely restrained power, begging to be unleashed completely. Plymouth built these cars for people who valued performance over prestige. The Roadrunner proved that you didn't need leather seats and chrome trim to go fast. You needed a big engine, a strong chassis, and enough courage to stand on the throttle when your brain screamed to lift. That philosophy created a racing legend that still resonates decades later. Number 6. The 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 302. Ford's answer to Chevrolet's Z28 dominance came in the form of the 1969 Mustang Boss 302, a homologation special so focused on Trans Am racing that everything else was secondary. Ford didn't mess around. They hired Bunky Knudsen from GM and gave him free rein to build a Mustang that could destroy Camaros on road courses. The result was a car that looked aggressive standing still and backed up those looks with performance that rewrote record books. The 302 cubic inch V8 was a mechanical marvel. Ford engineers created a short-stroke, high-revving engine that loved being wrung out to 7,000 RPM. With Cleveland-style heads featuring canted valves for improved flow and forged internals that could handle sustained abuse, this engine produced an advertised 290 horsepower. But like most racing-derived power plants, real output was significantly higher. Dyno tests showed numbers closer to 350 horses, and on track, that power was obvious. Parnelli Jones and George Fulmer piloted factory-backed Boss 302s to multiple Trans Am victories, proving Ford's engineering was championship caliber. The cars featured wider tracks, lower ride height, and suspension geometry optimized for racing. On tracks like Laguna Seca and Riverside, Boss Mustangs could lap consistently in the low 1 minute 50-second range, which put them among the fastest production-based cars in America. The chassis was the secret weapon. Ford engineers addressed every weakness that plagued earlier Mustangs. They reinforced the shock towers, added chassis bracing, and installed heavy-duty components throughout the suspension. The result was a car that could handle the violence of racing without flexing or braking. When drivers stood on the brakes entering a corner, the Boss stayed composed. When they got back on power exiting a turn, the chassis transferred power to pavement with minimal wheel spin or drama. What made the Boss 302 legendary wasn't just its competition success, but its street credibility. These were real cars that real people could buy and drive. The same machine that won races on Sunday could be driven to work on Monday without complaint. This dual nature embodied everything great about American muscle cars. No compromise, no excuses, just pure performance wrapped in beautiful sheet metal. Number 5. The 1966 Shelby GT350. When Carroll Shelby got his hands on the Ford Mustang platform, he transformed it from sporty secretary's car into genuine racing weapon. The 1966 Shelby GT350 proved that proper engineering and racing experience could extract performance that Ford's own engineers hadn't imagined. Shelby stripped out luxury, reinforced structure, improved cooling, and tuned suspension until the GT350 could run with the fastest sports cars in America. The heart was Ford's high-performance, 289 cubic inch small block V8, but Shelby's team worked magic with what they had. High-rise intake manifolds, larger carburetors, free-flowing exhaust, and aggressive tuning pushed output to 306 horsepower. More importantly, Shelby relocated components for better weight distribution and installed oil coolers that kept temperatures in check during sustained high-speed running. These details separated genuine racing cars from street machines playing dress-up. On road courses across America, GT350s dominated SCCA production racing. Drivers like Ken Miles and Bob Bondurant pushed these machines to lap records that stood for years. At tracks like Willow Springs and Riverside, GT350s regularly posted times faster than Corvettes and European sports cars. The secret was in the chassis work. Shelby stiffened everything, improved geometry, and installed components that could handle racing loads without failure. What made the GT350 special was its balance. This wasn't a straight-line monster that fell apart in corners. This was a complete performance package that excelled everywhere. Acceleration was brutal, braking was confidence-inspiring, and cornering was limited only by driver courage. When a GT350 came through a fast sweeper at full throttle, it looked planted and composed, like it was on rails rather than rubber. The sound distinguished Shelby Mustangs from everything else on track. Those side exit exhausts created a mechanical howl that announced the car's presence long before it came into view. When a GT350 accelerated out of a corner under full throttle, the exhaust note built into a crescendo that made spectators stop whatever they were doing and watch. This was American muscle delivered by a racing legend who understood that speed required more than just horsepower. Number 4. The 1969 Chevrolet Corvette L88. For the 1969 model year, Chevrolet offered an engine option in the Corvette that defied logic and embraced pure performance insanity. The L88 package featured a 427 cubic inch V8 with aluminum heads, radical camshaft timing, and a single monstrous Holley 4-barrel carburetor. Factory ratings claimed 430 horsepower, but everyone who drove one knew that number was laughable. Real output approached 500 horses, and on racetracks, that power turned the Corvette into a missile. At venues like Road Atlanta and Sebring, 88 Corvettes were weapons of mass acceleration. The combination of big block torque and lightweight fiberglass bodywork created power-to-weight ratios that few competitors could match. When drivers stood on the throttle, exiting slow corners, the rear tires clawed for traction, while the front end lifted skyward. The violence of acceleration was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. What separated the L88 from other big block Corvettes was its ability to sustain performance lap after lap. Chevrolet engineers installed heavy-duty cooling systems, upgraded brakes to handle repeated stops from triple-digit speeds, and reinforced the chassis to handle loads that would destroy lesser cars. Racing-prepared L88s could run 30-lap sprints without overheating or fading, maintaining consistent lap times while competitors fell away. On fast tracks like Daytona's road course, L88 Corvettes could achieve top speeds approaching 170 miles per hour on long straights. That velocity came from the big block's massive torque curve, over 460 pounds-feet at 4,000 RPM. The engine pulled like a freight train from low revs all the way to redline, making the L88 devastating on tracks with long straights connected by tight corners. The legacy of the L88 extends beyond lap times and race wins. This was the engine that proved American V8s could compete with European exotics on their own terms. When a Corvette with an L88 screamed past Ferrari and Porsche entries, it made a statement about American engineering that resonated around the world. We could build engines that were powerful, reliable, and fast enough to win against anyone. Number 3. The 1967 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 with 427. While the factory Z28 package came with the 302 cubic inch small block, privateers discovered that Chevrolet's massive 427 cubic inch Mark IV big block would fit under the hood with some creative engineering. The result was an unofficial combination that became legendary in SCCA and NASCAR road racing. These big block Camaros were brutally fast in a straight line, and surprisingly capable in corners when properly prepared. They represented what happened when racers stopped following rules and started chasing pure speed. The 427 big block and race trim could produce synthesis upwards of 550 horsepower, turning the Camaro into something beyond muscle car and approaching pure race machine. That power came with mechanical violence that you could feel through the steering wheel, seat, and pedals. When drivers buried the throttle, the car didn't just accelerate, it attacked the horizon with aggression that was almost frightening. On tracks like Mid-Ohio and Road America, big block Camaros dominated their classes despite giving away handling advantages to smaller engine competitors. The secret was in power application. While nimble cars had to maintain momentum through corners, big block Camaros could afford to scrub some speed knowing they could blast out of corners with authority that left competitors watching taillights disappear. This different approach to fast lap times proved equally effective. Preparation was critical. These weren't bolt-in conversions. Racers reinforced frames, upgraded cooling systems dramatically, installed heavy-duty transmissions and differentials, and completely reworked suspension to handle the extra weight up front. The result was a car that handled more like a refined, big block Corvette than a standard Camaro. Properly built examples could lap road courses faster than factory race cars, costing 10 times as much. What made these conversions legendary was their sound. A race-prepped 427 at full song created an exhaust note that started somewhere in your stomach and worked its way into your soul. The mechanical roar echoed off grandstands and rolled across infields like thunder. When one of these monsters came down the front straight with all cylinders breathing fire, everyone stopped and watched. That was respect earned through raw performance. Number 2. The 1968 Shelby GT500. Carroll Shelby's final and most powerful Mustang-based creation combined Ford's biggest engine with racing-proven engineering to create something truly special. The 1968 Shelby GT500 featured the legendary 428 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8 that produced a factory-rated 335 horsepower. That number was pure fiction designed to keep insurance companies happy. Real output was well over 400 horses, and with proper tuning, race engines approached 500 horsepower. On racetracks from California to Florida, GT500s proved that big block Mustangs could compete with anything on American soil. The combination of massive torque and Shelby's suspension wizardry created a car that accelerated like a top-fuel dragster and handled like a sports car. At tracks like Laguna Seca, GT500s posted lap times that shocked competitors and thrilled spectators. The sight of a big block Shelby hustling through the corkscrew at speed was something people remembered for decades. What made the GT500 special was its completeness. This wasn't just an engine swap. Shelby's team addressed cooling with larger radiators and functional scoops. They upgraded brakes with larger rotors and better pads. They stiffened chassis with roll cages and bracing. They improved aerodynamics with front spoilers and rear wings. Every detail was considered and executed with racing experience informing every decision. The Cobra Jet engine was Ford's answer to every performance challenge. Massive intake ports, heavy-duty bottom end, and aggressive camshaft timing created a power plant that loved high RPM and made torque everywhere. On track, drivers could short shift and still have enough torque to accelerate hard or wind it out to 6,000 ARP and feel the explosive power that came with maximum revs. This flexibility made the GT500 fast on any track layout. Shelby only built about 1,400 GT500s, making them rare even when new. Today, they're recognized as some of the most valuable and desirable muscle cars ever created. But their true legacy isn't measured in auction prices. It's measured in lap times and race wins. The GT500 proved that American ingenuity and racing experience could create machines that were beautiful, brutal, and blindingly fast. Number 1. The 1969 Ford Mustang Boss, 429. At the top of our countdown sits a machine so focused on pure performance that Ford barely pretended it was street legal. The 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 was built for one purpose: dominating NASCAR tracks. Homologation rules required Ford to build at least 500 street versions, so they did, reluctantly. What resulted was arguably the fastest production-based muscle car to attack American racetracks during the 1960s. This was speed in its purest form. The 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 was a racing engine that happened to be available in street trim. Ford engineers designed it specifically for high RPM NASCAR competition, where engines ran at 7,000 revolutions per minute for hours. Canted valve heads improved flow dramatically. Forged internals could handle sustained abuse that destroyed lesser engines. The result was a power plant, producing a claimed 375 horsepower, though everyone knew real output exceeded 500 horses with proper tuning. On NASCAR road courses like Riverside, in Watkins Glen, Boss 429 Mustangs ran lap times that embarrassed purpose-built race cars. The combination of massive power and surprising chassis competence created something greater than the sum of its parts. When NASCAR legends like David Pearson and Bobby Allison piloted these machines in anger, they posted speeds that seemed impossible for cars based on street platforms. Now, what made the Boss 429 devastating on track was its power curve. The semi-Hemi design created torque everywhere in the rev range. Drivers could lug the engine at 3,000 RPM and still have brutal acceleration, or wind it out to 6,000 RPM and feel power that seemed to increase exponentially. This flexibility made the Boss 429 fast on any track, from tight technical circuits to high-speed superspeedways. The chassis couldn't match the engine's sophistication, but Ford did their best. Heavy-duty suspension components, bigger brakes, and structural reinforcements helped the Mustang platform handle power that it was never designed to contain. Smart racers added roll cages, upgraded cooling systems, and completely reworked suspension geometry. The result was a car that could run consistent lap times in the low 1-minute 40s at tracks like Road America, numbers that put it among the fastest machines in America. NASCAR versions pushed performance even further. Race-prepared Boss featured blueprinted engines producing over 600 horsepower, aerodynamic improvements that reduced drag, and weight reduction that brought curb weight down to barely 3,000 pounds. These modifications created race cars capable of circling superspeedways at average speeds approaching 180 miles per hour in road courses at velocities that tested driver courage on every lap. The sound was apocalyptic. When a Boss 429 at full racing trim accelerated down a straightaway, the mechanical roar could be heard from miles away. The exhaust note wasn't just loud. It was violent, angry, and utterly captivating. Spectators felt it in their chests and bones. It was the sound of American racing at its absolute peak, when engineers cared more about speed than regulations and built engines that made physics negotiable. Only 859 Boss 429s were built, making it one of the rarest muscle cars ever produced. Ford lost money on every single one, but they didn't care. This was about proving that American engineering could compete with anyone at the highest levels of motorsport. And compete they did, winning races, setting records, and creating legends that still resonate today. The Boss 429 wasn't just the fastest 1960s car on racetracks. It was a statement about American automotive engineering at its most ambitious. It proved that when talented engineers were given freedom to chase speed without compromise, they could create machines that redefined what was possible. This was muscle car evolution at its final stage, raw, brutal, and absolutely magnificent. These 12 machines represent the absolute pinnacle of 1960s racing performance. They were built during an era when engineers chased speed without apology, when manufacturers competed on tracks every weekend, and when America proved to the world that we could build the fastest cars on Earth. Some broke records, some won championships. All of them earned their place in automotive history through courage, innovation, and raw performance. Which of these legends would you take for one last lap? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you love stories from the golden age of American racing, hit that subscribe button for more.